The rope hit the dusty ground at Sara Henderson's feet, and she knew without looking up that another customer had just walked out of her father's mercantile store in Butte, Montana territory, unwilling to be served by someone with Apache blood running through her veins. It was 1882, and the mining town of Butte sprawled across the rocky hillside like a wound that refused to heal, its copper veins feeding an insatiable hunger for wealth, while its people fed on prejudice and fear. Sara watched the rope coil in the dirt, her fingers trembling as she bent to retrieve it. She had learned long ago not to cry in public, not to show the townsfolk how their rejection carved pieces from her heart day after day. Her father, Robert Henderson, emerged from behind the counter, his weathered face creased with concern. He was a white man who had fallen in love with her mother, a woman named Morning Sky from the Apache tribe, 23 years ago when he had been working as a scout in Arizona territory. Their love had been fierce and true, but it had cost them both everything. When her mother died of fever 5 years ago, Sara inherited not just her dark eyes and bronze skin, but the burden of being caught between two worlds that wanted no part of her. "Sara, you do not need to work the counter today," her father said quietly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Someone has to, Papa," she replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "You cannot run this store alone, and we both know you cannot afford to hire help." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air between them. The store barely scraped by, losing customers steadily to Grimshaw's Mercantile on the other side of town. Edgar Grimshaw made no secret of his disdain for the Hendersons, often speaking loudly in the saloon about how mixed-blood people were corrupting the good Christian values of Butte. The bell above the door chimed, and Sara looked up to see Nathan Dalton walk into the store. Her breath caught in her throat the way it always did when she saw him, though she had trained herself not to show it. Nathan was a ranch hand who worked at the sprawling Double Creek Ranch, 15 miles north of town. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bleached brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of a Montana sky just before a storm. At 25, he had the kind of rugged handsomeness that turned heads wherever he went, but it was the kindness in his face that made Sara's heart race. "Morning, Mr. Henderson, Sara," Nathan said, tipping his hat to them both. His voice was warm and respectful, and he met Sara's eyes directly when he spoke to her, which was more than most people in this town bothered to do. "Good morning, Nathan," Sara replied, willing her voice not to shake. "What can we help you with today?" "I need about 50 feet of rope, some horseshoe nails, and a couple of those wool blankets you have in the back," he said, approaching the counter without hesitation. "Getting ready for winter out at the ranch. Boss wants everything stocked up before the first snow hits." Sara nodded and began gathering his order, acutely aware of his presence as he leaned against the counter. She had known Nathan for 3 years now, ever since he had arrived in Butte looking for work. He had always been courteous to her, treating her no differently than he would treat anyone else, but she had never allowed herself to hope for more than that. Hope was a dangerous thing for someone like her. As she measured out the rope, Nathan spoke again. "How have you been, Sara?" "I heard there was some trouble in town last week." Sara's hand stilled on the rope. The trouble he referred to had been Martha Whitfield, the banker's wife, who had publicly accused Sara of putting a curse on her husband when he had fallen ill with pneumonia. The accusation had been absurd, but it had spread through town like wildfire, and for 3 days not a single customer had entered their store. "We are managing," she said carefully, resuming her work. "That woman had no right to say those things about you," Nathan said, and there was an edge of anger in his voice that surprised her. "Everyone knows her husband smokes like a chimney and drinks like a fish. Of course, He got sick. Sara glanced up at him, startled by his vehemence. Their eyes met, and for a moment she saw something in his gaze that made her heart skip. But then her father's voice broke the spell. "Nathan, we appreciate your support," Robert said, coming over to help fold the blankets. "It means more than you know." Nathan nodded, but his eyes remained on Sara for another heartbeat before he looked away. "I only speak the truth, sir. This town has a way of turning on good people for no reason at all." As Sara wrapped his purchases, her fingers brushed against his hand when she passed him the bundle, and she felt a jolt like lightning strike through her. She pulled back quickly, her cheeks warming, but not before she saw Nathan's slight intake of breath. "Thank you," he said softly, his eyes searching hers. "I will see you again soon." After he left, Sara stood at the counter, her heart pounding so hard she was certain her father could hear it. She told herself not to be foolish, not to read meaning into a simple transaction, but the memory of his touch lingered on her skin like a brand. The rest of the day passed slowly, with only 2 other customers, both of whom barely acknowledged Sara's presence. As evening approached and her father began closing up the store, Sara stepped outside to sweep the boardwalk. The October air was crisp, carrying the promise of an early winter, and the mountains surrounding Butte glowed gold in the fading light. She was lost in thought, her broom moving in steady strokes when she heard raised voices from across the street. A group of men had gathered outside the saloon, and she recognized Edgar Grimshaw's booming voice above the others. "I am telling you, we need to do something about that situation," Grimshaw was saying. "It is not natural, a white man raising a half-breed girl in a decent town. What kind of example does that set for our children?" Sara's hands tightened on the broom handle, but she forced herself to keep sweeping, to pretend she had not heard. She had learned that reacting only made things worse. "Maybe you should mind your own business, Grimshaw," another voice said, and Sara looked up in shock. Nathan Dalton stood at the edge of the group, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression hard. "This is my business, Dalton," Grimshaw shot back. "This is my town, and I will not stand by while savages corrupt it from the inside." "Sara Henderson is no savage," Nathan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She is a decent, hard-working woman who has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your whole body." The street fell silent. Sara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever defended her like this, certainly not in public where everyone could hear. Grimshaw's face turned purple with rage. "You better watch yourself, Cowboy. You keep defending that girl and people might start wondering about you too." "Let them wonder," Nathan said. He turned and walked away from the group, crossing the street directly toward Sara. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he approached. When he reached her, he stopped and met her eyes. "I apologize that you had to hear that," he said quietly. "You did not have to do that," Sara whispered. "You have made yourself a target now." "I did what any decent person should do," Nathan replied. His hand reached out as if to touch her arm, then fell back to his side. "Sara, I have wanted to say something for a long time now, but I know the situation is complicated." "What do you mean?" she asked, though her heart seemed to know before her mind did. Nathan glanced around at the faces watching them from across the street. "This is not the right place. Would you take a walk with me? Just to the edge of town where we can talk properly." Sara knew she should say no. She knew that being seen with Nathan would only fuel more gossip, would make both of their lives harder. But the hope she had tried so hard to suppress suddenly flared to life in her chest. "Let me tell my father," she said. Robert Henderson looked worried when Sara told him where she was going, but he also looked understanding. "Be careful," was all he said, and Sara knew he was not just talking about the physical danger of walking at dusk. Nathan offered her his arm as they walked, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They walked in silence until they reached the outskirts of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and the copper mines scarred the hillsides. A large cottonwood tree stood alone near the road, its leaves golden in the dying light. "Sara," Nathan began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I do not know how to say this properly, so I am just going to speak plain. I have had feelings for you for a long time now. More than 2 years, if I am being honest." Sara's breath left her in a rush. "Nathan, I don't understand. Why would you want anything to do with me? You have seen how this town treats me. You know what I am." "I know exactly what you are," Nathan said, turning to face her fully. His hands came up to gently grip her shoulders, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. "You are strong and kind and brave. You face every day with your head held high even though people treat you terribly. You help your father run that store and never complain. You are beautiful and smart, and every time I see you it takes all my willpower not to stare." Tears pricked at Sara's eyes. "My blood." "Your blood makes you stronger than mine," Nathan interrupted, his voice fierce. "You have Apache heritage, Sara. That is nothing to be ashamed of. Your mother's people were warriors and survivors. They understood the land and the sky in ways white folks never will. That blood runs in your veins and it makes you powerful." "The town does not see it that way," Sara said, her voice breaking. "Then the town is blind and foolish," Nathan said. His hands slid down her arms to take her hands in his. "I know what I am asking would be difficult. I know that being with me would not make your life easier. People would talk, and they would be cruel. But Sara, I am in love with you, and I have been for so long that I cannot keep quiet about it anymore." Sara looked up into his eyes, those storm blue eyes, and saw nothing but truth and tenderness there. "I have loved you too," she whispered, "but I was so afraid to even think it." Nathan's face broke into a smile that transformed him, making him impossibly more handsome. "Then can I court you properly? Can I call on you and take you to dinner and show this whole damn town that I am proud to be with you?" "Yes," Sara said, and suddenly she was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Nathan." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest, and Sara felt safer and more cherished than she had in years. They stood under the cottonwood tree as the sun set and the stars began to emerge, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams they had each kept locked away. "I want to marry you," Nathan said as full darkness fell, and they reluctantly began walking back toward town. "I know it is too soon to ask properly, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable and serious." "I want that too," Sara admitted. "But Nathan, you need to understand what that would mean. We could never be fully accepted here. Our children would face the same prejudice I have faced." "Then maybe we would not stay here," Nathan said. "I have been saving money for years. I was planning to buy my own land eventually. We could go somewhere new, somewhere we could start fresh." The idea bloomed in Sara's mind like a flower. A new place, a new beginning. But then reality crashed back in. "I could not leave my father, he has no one else." "Then we bring him with us," Nathan said simply. "Sara, I have thought about this. I have thought about you and a future with you for so long. We can make it work." They reached the mercantile and Nathan walked her to the door. "Can I come by tomorrow evening? To speak with your father formally?" Sara nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Nathan squeezed her hand once more, then left, disappearing into the darkness of the street. Inside, her father was waiting up, a lamp burning low on the table. He took one look at Sara's face and smiled. "He is a good man," Robert said. "He wants to court me. He says he wants to marry me, Sara said, still hardly able to believe it. Her father pulled her into a hug. Your mother would have loved him, he said quietly. She would have said he has a warrior's heart. That night, Sara lay in bed and thought about her mother. Morning Sky had told her stories of the Apache people, of their strength and resilience, of how they had fought to protect their land and their way of life. Her mother had taught her to be proud of her heritage, even as the world tried to make her ashamed of it. And now Nathan, this white cowboy from Montana, saw that heritage as a source of strength rather than shame. The next day, word had spread through town about Nathan's confrontation with Grimshaw. Several customers who usually came to the Henderson store stayed away, but Sara found she did not care as much as she once would have. She moved through the day in a daze of happiness, counting the hours until evening when Nathan would arrive. He came at precisely 6 o'clock, cleaned up and wearing his best shirt, his hat held nervously in his hands. Robert Henderson invited him into the small parlor behind the store, and Sara sat beside her father as Nathan formally asked permission to court her. Mr. Henderson, I know I am just a ranch hand right now, but I have been saving my wages and I have plans to buy land and start my own ranch, Nathan said. I can provide for Sara, and I will protect her with my life. I love your daughter, sir, and I would be honored if you would allow me to court her properly. Robert looked at Nathan for a long moment, then at Sara, then back to Nathan. You know what you are taking on, the kind of hatred and difficulty you will face. Yes, sir, I do, Nathan said without hesitation. And I do not care. Sara is worth everything to me. Robert extended his hand and Nathan shook it firmly. Then you have my blessing. But Nathan, you hurt my daughter and I do not care how big you are. I will find a way to make you regret it. Understood, sir, Nathan said, grinning. I would expect nothing less. Over the next few weeks, Nathan courted Sara openly, and the town's reaction was exactly as harsh as they had feared. Customers abandoned the Henderson store in droves, flocking to Grimshaw's Mercantile instead. Nathan found his hours at the Double Creek Ranch cut back, his boss making it clear that his association with Sara was damaging the ranch's reputation. But through it all, Nathan never wavered. He took Sara to dinner at the small restaurant on the edge of town, where the owner, a Chinese immigrant named Lai Wai, served them without judgment. He brought her wildflowers from the prairie and sat with her on the store's front porch in the evenings, talking and laughing while the townspeople whispered and glared. One cold November evening, as they sat bundled in coats on the porch, Nathan told Sara about his past. I grew up in Texas, he said. My father was a rancher, but he lost everything in a drought. He turned to drinking and my mother took my little sister and left. I was 17, and I had to watch my father drink himself to death over the next 2 years. When he died, I decided I needed to start over somewhere far away. That is how I ended up in Montana. I am sorry you went through that, Sara said, taking his hand. It taught me something important, Nathan said. It taught me that life is too short to waste on other people's opinions. My father cared so much about what the other ranchers thought, about maintaining his pride and reputation, that he could not see what really mattered. I will not make that mistake. You are what matters to me, Sara. You are all that matters. Sara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. But the situation in town continued to deteriorate. In early December, someone threw a rock through the mercantile window in the middle of the night, and the word "savage" was painted on the boardwalk in front of the store. Nathan immediately rode into town when he heard, his face dark with fury. This has to stop, he said to Sara and her father as they cleaned up the glass. I will not stand by and watch them terrorize you. What can we do? Sara asked wearily. "Go to the sheriff. You know he will not help us." Nathan's jaw clenched. "Then I will handle it myself." "Nathan, no," Sara said, grabbing his arm. "Violence will only make things worse." "I am not talking about violence," Nathan said, "but I am going to make it very clear that actions have consequences." That night Nathan went to the saloon where he knew Grimshaw and his friends gathered. Sara did not learn until later what exactly was said, but Nathan apparently challenged Grimshaw to say to his face what he had been saying behind his back. When Grimshaw refused and tried to leave, Nathan blocked his path and spoke loudly enough for the entire saloon to hear. "You are a coward, Grimshaw. You terrorize a woman and her elderly father because you are too weak to face anyone who can fight back. You hide behind your friends and your money, but everyone in this room knows the truth. You are pathetic." Grimshaw tried to throw a punch, but Nathan easily dodged it and walked away, leaving the man sputtering with rage in front of the whole town. The gesture did not change many minds, but it did make the vandalism stop. People were too afraid of Nathan's wrath to continue their nighttime attacks. The store remained largely empty of customers, however, and Sara knew they were running out of money. One evening in mid-December, as snow began to fall for the first time that winter, Sara's father called her and Nathan into the parlor. He looked grave, and Sara felt her stomach twist with worry. "I have made a decision," Robert said. "I am going to sell the store." "Papa, no," Sara exclaimed. "Let me finish," Robert said gently. "I am selling the store and we are going to use the money to start over. Nathan has found land for sale in Oregon in a valley where there is a mixed community. Chinese railroad workers, Mexican ranchers, some native families. We would not be outcasts there." Sara looked at Nathan, who was watching her carefully. "You planned this," she said. "Your father and I have been talking," Nathan admitted. "Sara, there is nothing left for any of us here. Your father is barely making enough to eat. My hours have been cut so far that I am making half what I used to, and the hatred is not going to get better. Oregon is a chance for a fresh start." "But the store is all Papa has left of Mama," Sara said, tears streaming down her face. "No," Robert said firmly. "I have you and I have my memories. Your mother would have wanted us to be somewhere safe and happy. She never wanted you to suffer the way you have here." Sara looked between the two men she loved most in the world and slowly nodded. "When would we leave?" "As soon as I can sell the store and we can prepare for the journey," Robert said. "Probably early spring, when the mountain passes are clear." The next few months passed in a blur of preparation. Robert found a buyer for the store, a young couple newly arrived from the East who did not know about the town's prejudices yet. Nathan gave notice at the ranch and spent every spare moment planning their route and purchasing supplies for the journey. As word spread that the Hendersons were leaving, the town's reaction was mixed. Some people were openly pleased to see them go. Others, surprisingly, seemed regretful. Mrs. Patterson, the schoolteacher, came to the store one day and quietly apologized to Sara for not speaking up against the cruelty she had witnessed. "I was a coward," Mrs. Patterson said, tears in her eyes. "I was afraid of losing my position, of being targeted myself, but that is no excuse. You deserved better from this town, from all of us." Sara did not know what to say, so she simply hugged the older woman and thanked her for her kindness now, even if it came too late to change anything. On a cold February evening, Nathan took Sara to dinner at Lai Wei's restaurant one more time. Over plates of steaming dumplings, Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. "Sara Henderson, I have loved you for 3 years, and I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. When we get to Oregon, I am going to buy us land and I am going to build us a house. But before we leave Butte, I need to know, will you marry me?" Sara felt tears overflow down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes, Nathan. Yes, with all my heart." Nathan pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a silver ring with a small turquoise stone. "This is not much," he said. "But turquoise was sacred to the Apache people. I wanted you to have something that honored your mother's heritage." Sara could barely see the ring through her tears as Nathan slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and the blue-green stone caught the lamplight beautifully. "It is everything," she whispered. They decided to marry before they left Butte, wanting to begin their new life as husband and wife. The wedding was small, held in the parlor of the mercantile with only Robert, Mrs. Patterson, and a few of Nathan's friends from the ranch in attendance. Sara wore her mother's wedding dress, which Robert had kept carefully preserved, and Nathan wore his Sunday best. The local preacher had refused to perform the ceremony, so they found a traveling minister passing through town who agreed to marry them. As Sara and Nathan spoke their vows, she thought about her mother and father standing in this same parlor 23 years ago, making similar promises to each other, despite the world's disapproval. "I promise to honor your heritage and teach our children to be proud of their Apache blood," Nathan said as part of his vows, and Sara had to pause to compose herself before she could speak her own promises. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Nathan kissed her for the first time as her husband, Sara felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was right. This was what her mother had wanted for her, to find someone who loved all of her, who saw her mixed heritage as a gift rather than a curse. That night, in the small room above the mercantile that had been Sara's bedroom all her life, Nathan held her close and spoke softly about their future. "I am going to build you the most beautiful house in Oregon," he promised, "with a big kitchen for cooking and a porch where we can watch the sunset, and we will fill it with children who will grow up knowing they are loved and valued exactly as they are." "Tell me about this land you have found," Sara said, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingers. "It is in the Willamette Valley, along a river with clear water. The soil is rich, perfect for crops and grazing. Our nearest neighbor is a man named Diego Alvarez. He is from Mexico and has been there for 5 years with his family. He wrote to me saying the community is welcoming and diverse. There are even a few Apache families who were displaced during the wars and have settled there peacefully." Sara felt hope bloom in her chest. "It sounds wonderful." "It will be," Nathan said, kissing her forehead. "I promise you, Sara, our children will never know the kind of hatred you have faced. They will grow up free and proud." As winter gave way to early spring, the preparations intensified. They would be traveling by wagon train part of the way, then striking out on their own for the final leg of the journey. Nathan purchased a sturdy wagon and 2 strong horses, and they packed carefully, taking only what was essential and what was precious. The night before they were set to leave, Sara walked through the empty mercantile one last time. The shelves were bare, the counter where she had spent so many hours was cleared, and the whole place echoed with memories both painful and sweet. She thought about all the customers who had rejected her, but also about the few who had shown kindness. She thought about her mother who had died in the room upstairs, and her father, who had never once made her feel like her heritage was shameful. "Are you ready?" Nathan asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am ready to start our life together," Sara said. "I am ready to leave this place and all its hatred behind." They left Butte on a clear April morning in 1883, their wagon packed with their belongings and their hearts full of hope. Robert sat in the back of the wagon, looking frail but determined, while Nathan drove and Sara sat beside him, watching the town grow smaller behind them. The journey to Oregon took nearly 3 months, and it was harder than any of them had anticipated. They traveled with a wagon train for the first 6 weeks, and even among the diverse group of travelers heading west, they faced prejudice. Several families refused to let their children play near Sara, and more than once, they were excluded from evening gatherings around the campfire. But Nathan never let Sara feel alone. He stayed close to her, made a point of introducing her as his wife to everyone they met, and spoke proudly about her Apache heritage. Slowly, some of the other travelers began to warm to them. A young family from Ireland, the O'Connors, became friendly, and Mrs. O'Connor told Sara that she understood what it was like to face discrimination, as the Irish were often treated poorly in the East. The physical challenges of the journey were immense. They crossed rivers and mountains, endured storms and unbearable heat. Robert's health began to decline, and Sara spent many sleepless nights tending to him, worried that he would not survive to see their new home. One particularly difficult night, as they camped in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, Robert's fever spiked dangerously high. Sara stayed awake all night, bathing his forehead with cool water and praying in both English and the few Apache words her mother had taught her. Nathan sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder, lending her his strength. Just before dawn, the fever finally broke and Robert opened his eyes and smiled weakly at his daughter. "Your mother is watching over us," he whispered. "I saw her in my dreams. She says she is proud of you." Sara cried then, holding her father's hand and thanking whatever powers had spared him. As they continued west, Sara found herself changing. The open spaces of the frontier, the endless sky, the mountains and rivers they crossed, all of it called to something deep inside her. She began to understand what her mother must have felt, the connection to the land that was part of her Apache heritage. She taught Nathan the few Apache words she knew and told him the stories her mother had shared. One evening, as they camped beside a clear stream, Nathan surprised Sara by carving a small flute from willow wood. "Your mother played one like this, didn't she?" he asked. "You told me she would play in the evenings." Sara nodded, unable to speak. Her mother had indeed played a flute, and the sound had been one of Sara's favorite childhood memories. Nathan put the flute to his lips and blew experimentally, producing a breathy, uncertain note. Sara laughed through her tears and showed him how to hold his fingers properly, the way her mother had tried to teach her years ago. They spent the evening practicing together, and though the music was far from perfect, it was the most beautiful sound Sara had heard in years. They finally left the wagon train in late June, striking out on their own for the final stretch to the Willamette Valley. The land grew greener and more lush as they traveled west through Oregon, and Sara felt her spirits lift with each passing mile. When they finally reached the property Nathan had purchased, Sara could hardly believe her eyes. The land was exactly as Nathan had described, a beautiful stretch of valley along a river, with forests rising on the nearby hills and the sky stretching endlessly overhead. A small cabin already stood on the property, built by the previous owner, and though it was rough and basic, Sara loved it immediately. Their neighbor, Diego Alvarez, rode over the next day to welcome them. He was a warm, friendly man in his 40s, with a kind smile and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His wife, Rosa, came the following day with their 3 children and a basket of food. "We are so happy to have neighbors," Rosa said in accented English, hugging Sara warmly. "This is a good community here. People help each other, no matter where they come from." Over the following weeks, Sara and Nathan met more of their neighbors. There were indeed Apache families nearby, and one elderly woman named Silver Dawn spoke the language fluently. She spent hours with Sara, teaching her the words and customs her mother had not lived long enough to fully share. Your mother would be proud, Silver Dawn told Sara one afternoon as they sat together grinding corn. You have honored her memory by staying strong and finding a good man who respects your heritage. Nathan proved true to his word and immediately began building an addition to the cabin. With help from Diego and other neighbors, the small cabin grew into a proper house with multiple rooms, a large kitchen, and the porch Nathan had promised. They planted crops and purchased cattle, starting the ranch Nathan had dreamed of for so long. Robert regained his strength in the clean air and peaceful surroundings. He spent his days reading, helping where he could, and writing long letters to Mrs. Patterson back in Butte, a correspondence that surprised both Sara and Nathan, but that seemed to bring her father joy. As autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, Sara realized she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening as they sat on their new porch, watching the sun set over the river. Nathan's face transformed with joy, and he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sara asked, though she could see the answer written all over his face. "Happy does not even begin to describe it," Nathan said. He placed his hand gently on her stomach. "A child who will grow up free and loved, who will know both sides of their heritage are beautiful. Sara, this is everything I have ever wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. Sara suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and there were times when she wondered if she had the strength to endure. But Nathan was endlessly patient and supportive, sitting with her through the difficult nights, bringing her water and cool cloths, and never complaining about the extra work that fell to him. The women in the community rallied around Sara as well. Rosa visited regularly, bringing remedies and advice from her own 5 pregnancies. Silver Dawn made special teas from herbs she gathered in the forest, following old Apache traditions. Even some of the white women in the area, seeing how devoted Nathan was to Sara and how respected she had become in the community, began to accept her and offer their own support. Winter came, blanketing the valley in snow and turning the world quiet and white. Sara's belly grew round, and she spent long hours by the fire, sewing baby clothes and preparing for the arrival of their child. Nathan would often sit beside her, his hand resting on her stomach, feeling their baby kick and move. "What should we name him or her?" Nathan asked one snowy evening. "If it is a boy, I would like to name him after my father," Sara said. "Robert, or perhaps the Apache name my mother gave me that I have never used, Sky Hawk." "Sky Hawk Dalton," Nathan said, trying it out. "That has a strong sound to it, and if it is a girl—" "I want to honor my mother," Sara said. "Perhaps we could call her Dawn for morning sky." Nathan smiled and kissed her. "Perfect." In March of 1884, on a clear cold morning when the first signs of spring were just beginning to show, Sara went into labor. Rosa and Silver Dawn came to help, sending Nathan and Robert out of the house to pace nervously in the yard. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Sara called on every bit of strength she possessed, thinking of her mother, of all the Apache women who had endured this before her. Of the strength Nathan had always said her heritage gave her. Just before dawn, their son was born, crying lustily and waving tiny fists at the world. Silver Dawn placed him in Sara's arms, and she looked down at his red, wrinkled face and felt love so fierce it took her breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered. When they finally allowed Nathan into the room, he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at his wife and son with tears streaming down his face. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and when Sara placed the baby in his arms, Nathan cradled him like he was made of glass. "Hello, Sky Hawk," Nathan said softly. "Welcome to the world, son." They called him Hawk for short, and as Robert held his grandson for the first time, the old man wept openly. "Morning sky," he whispered. "I wish you could see him. He has your eyes." It was true. Hawk had inherited Sarah's dark eyes, along with skin that was bronze like hers and hair that was nearly black. He would clearly favor his mother's Apache heritage, and Sarah worried briefly about what that might mean for him. But as the weeks passed, and neighbors came to visit and offer gifts, she realized that here in this place, her son would truly grow up free from the hatred she had experienced. The community celebrated his birth without any concern for his mixed heritage, and Nathan's pride in his son was so evident that no one could doubt his devotion to his family. Hawk proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed fascinated by everything around him. Nathan doted on him, carrying him around the ranch as soon as he was old enough, showing him the horses and cattle and telling him stories about everything they saw. "You are going to spoil him," Sarah teased one afternoon, watching Nathan play with their 6-month-old son. "That is my right as a father," Nathan replied, making silly faces that had Hawk giggling. "Besides, I want him to know every day of his life how loved and wanted he is." As Hawk grew into a toddler, curious and adventurous, Sarah became pregnant again. This time, she was less sick, and the pregnancy felt easier, though she was more tired chasing after an active 2-year-old. Their second child, a daughter, was born in the spring of 1886. They named her Dawn Morning Sky Dalton, honoring both of Sarah's names from her mother. Dawn was quieter than her brother, with Nathan's blue eyes and a mixture of her parents' coloring that was somehow uniquely her own. "She is going to be a heartbreaker," Diego pronounced when he came to meet the new baby. "Look at those eyes." The ranch prospered as the children grew. Nathan's hard work and knowledge of cattle ranching paid off, and they were able to expand their herd and build a proper barn. Sarah started a garden that became the envy of the community, growing vegetables and herbs that she sold at the small market that had formed in the nearest town, a place called Clearwater, where prejudice seemed to have no foothold. Robert's health gradually declined as he aged, but he lived long enough to see both of his grandchildren walking and talking. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1888, a smile on his face. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch with a view of the river and mountains beyond. "He loved this place," Sarah said as they stood by his grave. "He was finally at peace here." "He loved you," Nathan corrected gently, pulling her close, "and he was so proud of the life we built." Sarah mourned her father deeply, but she took comfort in knowing that he had spent his final years in a place where he was respected and happy, surrounded by family and friends who valued him. Life continued its rhythm. Hawk grew tall and strong, showing a natural aptitude with horses that delighted Nathan. He learned to speak some Apache from Silver Dawn, who had become like a grandmother to the children. Dawn was quieter but equally bright, often found reading books or helping her mother in the garden. When Hawk was 8 and Dawn 6, Sarah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named River and Sky. The twins were born during a thunderstorm, arriving so quickly that Nathan barely had time to fetch Rosa before they made their appearance. "4 children," Nathan said, holding the newborn twins while Sarah rested. "We have been blessed, Sarah." "We have," she agreed, watching her husband cradle their youngest children with the same tenderness he had shown their first. "More blessed than I ever imagined possible." The children grew up knowing both sides of their heritage. Nathan made sure they understood their Apache roots, encouraging Silver Dawn to teach them the old stories and traditions. He also taught them about his own family history, about the importance of integrity and hard work, about treating all people with respect regardless of where they came from. The community thrived as well. More families moved to the area, drawn by stories of the diverse, welcoming settlement. A proper school was built, and a church that welcomed everyone regardless of background. Clearwater grew from a collection of scattered farms into a real town, with a general store, a blacksmith, and even a doctor. Sara often thought about Butte and wondered what had become of the people there. She learned through Mrs. Patterson, who had kept writing to Robert and then continued corresponding with Sara after his death, that Grimshaw's mercantile had burned down under mysterious circumstances, and Edgar Grimshaw had left town in disgrace after being caught embezzling from the bank. The news brought Sara no particular satisfaction. She had long ago stopped caring about the opinions of people who had treated her so cruelly. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Nathan took Sara on a picnic to the spot where he had first purchased their land. They sat on a blanket overlooking the valley, watching their 4 children play by the river below, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "You remember what I told you that first time?" Nathan asked, taking her hand. "About your blood making you stronger than mine." "I remember," Sara said. "I did not believe you then." "Do you believe me now?" Nathan asked. Sara looked at their children, at the ranch they had built, at the community they had helped create where people of all backgrounds lived together peacefully. She thought about her mother's strength and her father's courage, about the Apache blood that ran through her veins and the heritage she had passed to her children. "I believe you," she said. "I am strong because of where I came from, because of all the people who survived and endured so that I could be here. My mother's people, my father's courage, all of it made me who I am." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her. "And I fall more in love with who you are every single day." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the children climbed back up the hill and piled onto the blanket with their parents. Hawk, now a lanky 10-year-old, leaned against his father's shoulder. Dawn sat pressed close to Sara's side. The twins, energetic 4-year-olds, tumbled over everyone, unable to sit still. "Tell us about Grandmother Morning Sky," Dawn said. It was a frequent request. The children loved hearing stories about the grandmother they had never met. Sara began the familiar tale, telling them about how her mother had been a healer among her people, how she had met Robert Henderson when he was scouting for the army, how they had fallen in love despite the world telling them they should not. She told them about her mother's strength and wisdom, about the songs she used to sing and the stories she used to tell. "She would have loved all of you so much," Sara finished, her voice thick with emotion. "She would have been so proud of the people you are becoming." "We are proud too," Hawk said. "Silver Dawn told me that having Apache blood means we are part of warriors, that we should always stand up for what is right." "That is true," Nathan said. "But remember, being a warrior is not just about fighting. It is about having the courage to be kind, to protect those who need protecting, and to build something good in the world." "Like you and Mama did," Dawn said. "You built this ranch and our home, and you helped make Clearwater a good place." Sara and Nathan exchanged a look of pure love and satisfaction. Their children understood. They knew their heritage was something to be proud of, that their mixed blood was not a curse, but a gift that made them who they were. As twilight deepened and stars began to appear, they walked back to the house together, the children running ahead while Sara and Nathan followed hand in hand. The house stood solid and welcoming, light glowing in the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. It was everything Nathan had promised that first night in Butte when he had confessed his love, everything Sara had been afraid to hope for. Inside, Nathan built up the fire while Sara tucked the younger children into bed. When she came back downstairs, He was sitting by the hearth, the same flute he had carved for her years ago in his hands. He had become quite skilled at playing it over the years, and now he played a soft melody that her mother had once sung to her as a lullaby. Sara sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, and felt a contentment so complete it brought tears to her eyes. She thought about the girl she had been in Butte, so beaten down by the world's hatred, so convinced that she would never be truly loved or accepted. She thought about the courage it had taken for Nathan to stand up for her, to see her worth when no one else did, to believe that her mixed heritage was a source of strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Nathan asked, lowering the flute. "For seeing me when I was invisible. For loving me when I did not believe I was lovable. For giving me all of this." She gestured to the house, to the life they had built. Nathan set the flute aside and took both her hands in his. "Sara, you gave me just as much. You gave me a purpose, a family, a reason to be a better man. You are the strongest person I have ever known, and I am honored every single day that you chose me." They sat together by the fire as the night deepened outside, talking quietly about their plans for the ranch, about the children's futures, about all the dreams they still wanted to pursue together. Outside, the Oregon night was peaceful, the stars brilliant in the clear sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Over the years that followed, the Dalton family became pillars of the Clearwater community. Nathan was elected to the town council, where he worked to ensure that the town's welcoming nature was written into its founding principles. Sara started a school program teaching traditional Apache crafts and stories, preserving her mother's heritage for future generations. Hawk grew into a fine young man who combined his father's strength with his mother's wisdom. He fell in love with Rosa and Diego's youngest daughter, Maria, and the joining of the two families brought great joy to everyone. Dawn became a teacher, educating children of all backgrounds with patience and kindness. The twins, River and Sky, were inseparable and eventually started a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Oregon. Sara and Nathan grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on their porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had played, and marveled at the life they had created. One evening, when Sara was 65 and Nathan 67, they sat together watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Sara's hair was streaked with gray now, and Nathan's face was lined with age, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love in Butte all those years ago. "You ever regret leaving Montana?" Sara asked. "Not for a single moment," Nathan replied. "Sara, you are my home. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." "I love you," Sara said. "I have loved you since that day you defended me in front of Grimshaw, though I was too afraid to admit it even to myself." "I love you too," Nathan said. "And I was right, you know. Your blood, your heritage, it did make you stronger than me. You survived things I cannot even imagine, and you did it with grace and dignity. You are remarkable." Sara leaned against him, and they watched as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in glorious shades of red and gold. Their children and grandchildren were gathered inside the house, preparing dinner, their voices and laughter floating out through the open windows. It was a sound of family, of love, of a legacy that would endure. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Sara thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from the rejected girl in Butte to the beloved matriarch of a thriving family. She thought about her mother, Morning Sky, and hoped that wherever she was, she could see what her daughter had built, the family that carried her blood and honored her memory. She thought about the pain she had endured and the hatred she had faced, and how all of it had led her to this moment, to this life. To this man who had seen her worth when the world had tried to convince her she had none. She thought about the words Nathan had spoken so long ago, words that had changed everything. "Your blood makes you stronger than mine." He had been right. Her Apache heritage had given her strength, resilience, and a connection to something ancient and powerful. Combined with her father's unwavering love and Nathan's steadfast devotion, that strength had allowed her to not just survive, but to thrive, to build something beautiful and lasting. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Sara and Nathan sat together in the peace they had created, surrounded by the love they had nurtured, living proof that prejudice and hatred could be overcome, that true love could conquer the cruelty of an unjust world, and that a mixed heritage was not a weakness to be hidden but a gift to be celebrated. They lived many more years together, never taking a single day for granted, always grateful for the miracle of having found each other in a world that tried to keep them apart. And when their time finally came, they left behind a legacy of love, acceptance, and strength that echoed through generations, a testament to the power of seeing beyond the surface to the truth beneath, to recognizing that our differences make us not weaker, but infinitely stronger,